Oh, okay.
Yesterday or something like that, from having been gone in Japan for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So I think.
Yeah, Dan is away.
Were we expecting anybody on Zoom?
Good, Lillian.
Good.
Has everybody or anybody done their, I don't think you have to do it as an.
I didn't do it. I need to
The
do it.
municipal
As
ethics
you
code?
reminded me.
Yes.
Okay,
And
so, do you know what I did?
What did you do it?
Well,
Am
I
I
did
the
it.
last
You
one?
finished and you forgot to hit the end part, so you didn't get the certificate.
Oh,
Right.
Because I did the same thing.
Oh, God.
And then you can't go back.
You can go back.
No, because
Oh, I went right back in.
Oh,
Like,
I'm
a couple
glad
days
you're telling
later.
me
know.
this.
Oh, was it a couple of days?
Yeah, because I'm
Oh,
sorry,
no.
the administrative assistant here, I forgot her name.
Sean.
She emailed and said, "Send me your certificate." I'm like, "Oh, I forgot to get this." I went back in and it let me.
So we need 2 chairs.
I'm an alternate, I just sit in the back.
No.
Is that how that works?
Oh, no, I'm so glad you said that because I forgot.
So,
to do that.
I'll pull this up.
Toby, hello. I'm gonna have everybody go around and say hello, so we'll all, because we also have another new person, Larry, but he was.
Toby smiles. All right. I know that guy, so.
Lauren
Cass.
Hi, Lauren.
Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Susan Morris.
Hi, Susan.
So
Well, I've
Toby,
met before.
I'm not really quite sure I have extra copies of anything to give you at the moment. And I did leave it, oh, you know what? Here's like an old zoning regulations, so you can have
You're
that.
present.
Oh, and I think you could have
And
this.
I can make copies.
And you can have that.
Copies.
We're working on
Yeah, I was
that.
wondering if there's any.
Back in the
zoning
day, I had a
regulation
background
copies
in
available or not.
What's-
I didn't
The
get a
zoning
chance to
regulation,
look at
is
it,
there
so
really
just,
cool.
you know,
Copy
It's just a few
available or
things
do
to
I
look
make
at.
I
my
didn't-
own or?
came today and I
Um,
literally have been.
I didn't
I
even
couldn't
dig into
get
it
to
at
it
all.
upstairs.
Just said,
Oh,
"Look
no,
at some
see, the
samples."
problem is everything upstairs is moved because they're painting. So I could get it to you next time or mail it to you.
Okay, good.
Oh, I thought you said they're painting your office like at home.
No.
So, let's just go around and introduce, I think nobody else is coming in person. So I'm Debbie Granquist, and I thought on my way over here, what to say, because I realized that I've been in Weston for 35 years, and I actually think I've been on the DRB or zoning board for 30 of those years.
Wow.
So there's like a glutton for punishment, and I used to be a lawyer. Before that, I was a banker, and now I'm just involved in getting this library finished over here, which looks pretty sorry at the moment. Anyway, Susan.
Susan Morris. I have lived in Weston going on 8 years. I'm from Connecticut. I am an attorney, healthcare. I currently have 3 jobs.
Is this one of them?
No. I work for the state of Vermont as a Department of Financial Regulation, mostly assigned to insurance division work because my background is all health insurance. I also do clinical research study work for a company out of Tampa, Florida that does, this is new, pediatric eye disease studies and diabetes studies and things like that. And they're worried right now because of the NIH funding issues, but and then the third job is medical device company, wearable diverters that protect you from sudden cardiac arrest. So those are the people do a lot of contract work.
It's all stuff I never knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're learning more.
There's a reason why, like, I have to do Zoom most of the time, but today I was like, I gotta go.
Well, we thought that just because you had one job.
No,
Not three.
you should see my setup. It's like monitor,
Oh,
laptop,
wow.
laptop.
Oh,
and
so
I'm
you have a
like,
different monitor for each job?
uh-huh.
Oh, my goodness.
So I need to give up something at some point.
Right.
So, yeah.
Or buy more monitors.
Yeah, I
Bigger
actually
desk.
had to buy another desk. So
I was just gonna
have-
say, get a bigger desk.
I have a
but that was
5-foot
not
desk
good.
and then I got a 5-foot table behind it and I'm trying to figure out like how to do this. And I was telling Will before, I forget who I'm talking to sometimes.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, this person's telling me about Stowe, Vermont, and they're from
Mhm.
Florida. And I'm
Mhm.
about to say, oh, the guy I work with over here, he's from Stowe. Vermont. And I'm like, they're not gonna know what you're talking about. Let's be quiet.
Funny.
So,
Okay, Laura.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can follow those two, but I'm Laura Katz. I have had a house up here for 5 years, but I've moved up here full-time from the DC area. I think it's been 2 years that I
Okay.
lived up here. I am also a former lawyer. I did do zoning law about 1,000,000 years ago for the city of Cambridge in Massachusetts. And then I became another kind of lawyer, just kind of changed my focus and was a media lawyer for a long time. And yeah, I live here with my husband, who's still a lawyer, whose firm just was the subject of all this stuff. So we've had a lot of calls and conversations today, because Doug Emhoff actually works for his firm,
Oh,
not to
gosh.
name drop, but so
I know what
that's
firm that is.
that's
so
sort
do
of
I.
what's going on in my tangential life. But
you do
That's
know
it.
who my neighbor is, right?
no.
One of the other firms.
Oh,
Oh,
Mark Elias.
Yeah.
oh, Mark Elias,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, David's firm, Doug Emhoff went there after Wilkie,
Oh, okay.
after his other life, and then they also defended the 2 poll workers in the
Oh,
Giuliani
okay, yeah,
case. So
mhm,
they're,
Georgia.
but you know, there
Oh,
are all kinds of opinions at that firm, but this is a big deal now,
Yeah,
you know, when law
absolutely.
firms start to do this. So
Mhm.
anyway, not to make a political comment, but that's me.
Okay,
Yeah.
Kobe Smiles, lived in Vermont for 23 years and in Weston for 12 years. So, and before that, we lived in Westchester County in New York
Okay.
for many years. But my boys went to Stratton Mountain School. My wife went out the door with a big suitcase and I found out we were moving to Vermont.
Oh, funny.
That was one way to do it back in '02. So,
Right.
and I run a small family office from Merrill Lynch. I still have an office in Connecticut. My son's down there and the rest of the team's down there.
Okay, Larry,
And you two are our new alternates, and
No.
you were formally appointed, so welcome.
thank you. So Larry Dalzell, I am an architect by profession, worked in Manhattan and Northern Jersey for 40+ years. Got tired of that commute. We had a weekend place up here, actually up over in Andover Hill Road, starting in 14, and then we moved up here permanently about 5.5 years ago. So, and I was also, when in Jersey, I was on the zoning board of adjustment for the town of Chatham, New Jersey, and so that was 14 years there, 7 of which I was the chairman. So that's my background experience.
Jeff Lennox, we've had the house here for 15, 16 years, somewhere around there. Full-time, maybe 10 of those years. Not an attorney, never was an attorney.
Never wanted to be an attorney.
Never wanted to be.
Environmental consultant, as I think most people know. Started with CBA, back in the ZBA, which is zoning board of adjustment, not appeals. And then that morphed into DRB after merging 2 of the entities together.
I am Will Goodwin. I was a cook at Kinhaven and I never went home.
But you also were a student,
I was a student in
and you
Kinhaven.
played the violin,
No, the trombone.
oh, the trombone, well, that's pretty different.
And I got into being the zoning administrator just through the town's old boy network, and I had to learn on the job, which it was a rough start. But I've been doing it for long enough now that and I do 5 towns, that I've learned quite a bit.
So, just again, a little background for our 2 new people, but it also helps us to kind of think about where we are. Our zoning regulations, as you can see from this original thing, were adopted in 1976. And they've only gone through like little tiny bits of amendments in all those little things. There was never like a giant rewrite. It was like, oh, we got to fix this, or we got to add this, or that kind of thing over the years. And as those of us who serve on the DRB or the ZBA before this know, there's some confusing things in here that sometimes you find contradictory stuff in one place versus another place, and trying to interpret what really is going on. And the zoning regulations were actually adopted at the time. There was like a model zoning regulation thing that came out of Ohio. And so these were from Ohio. Same with our subdivision regulations, which I think were adopted about the same time, and they were for Ohio also. So in some respects, they don't really fit with a small, they don't really fit with Vermont in some respects, and they certainly don't fit with a small, village in Vermont. I mean, clearly, if we were in Burlington or Montpelier or Bennington or Brattleboro, our zoning regulations would look different than what we would even like them to look like. So, when I think of models for what we want our zoning regulations to be, I think of other small kind of towns, villages in here. So in addition to them being kind of difficult in certain places, they also, and this is a place where we're really sort of relying a little bit more on Will, they're also out of date with respect to state law that has taken place over the years. And so, things should have been changed because of state law that didn't get changed. Let me take a step back further too. The Development Review Board really doesn't have responsibility for amending the zoning regulations, but we're taking the opportunity, because we don't actually have other work at the moment, to look through these.
All my other towns are going right now, and I haven't even had an application this year yet.
Yeah. Anyway,
even for a shed.
we're taking this opportunity to go through them and kind of make a recommendation to the Planning Commission for our thoughts on where things could be changed, bettered, made easier, made simpler, made clearer. And then the other thing is the Planning Commission who has the responsibility for writing zoning regulations. They just finished rewriting the town plan, and they got a planning grant to do that, and they want to get a planning grant to do the rewrite of these. And so it could be probably at least a year before they would start, maybe.
Yeah, well, Londonderry's been doing bylaws for over 5 years.
Yeah, so this, I think our goal might be is if we could get the Planning Commission to think this way, and the Select Board would be to find some things that were the low-hanging fruit, like either required to be changed because of state law, or the things that have really, really, really caused us problems. And if we could get those in and have a small amendment, that would be helpful, because otherwise it's going to be years before we see a complete kind of overhaul.
And it seems like the Planning Commission is really into thinking about what the town should look like and what's good for the community and stuff like that, but they're not as focused on what rules don't make any sense, what, the minutiae of the zoning regulations.
Mhm.
So we could point them towards some bad minutia.
So is that from the members that have been involved in this? Is that sort of what you're thinking too? That's where we're going, and any questions from you guys?
It may help to describe, especially for these guys, what gets addressed purely by the ZA, because a lot of things, when people build things and develop things, are purely in Will's hands, is what goes to this group.
It's an excellent question, and we can start there, but that also is something that could be more clarified in here, you know, because I think it's very difficult as an applicant, because I was an applicant recently for the library, you know, it's really difficult to kind of figure out what do I need to do? And I mean, and I sort of, if anybody should know, I should know, but you know, it's kind of difficult to figure out like, where do I start? How do I go here? That kind of thing. Jeff, you weren't, I don't know, last time that this is something that the town of Charlotte has on their website, you know, and it helps some, it's like a step by step of what you need to do to file for a application. And I think that that could be very helpful. I also think is, and I'm going to turn this over to Will, and he's going to tell us what he does, and then we can tell what we do. But I also think that there is some opportunity as we're doing this to find, and we found some places where we can give, or we'd like to give a little bit more discretion to the zoning administrator to make decisions rather than having to come to us. Because if they come to us, they have to go through a formal hearing process, which requires notice of neighbors, notice to abutters and all that kind of stuff. And there's a reason for that, because you don't want your next door neighbor necessarily building a skyscraper next to you without you knowing about it. But then by the same token, if they are trying to, you know, I don't know, move their porch out 3 feet, you know, that may be something that we don't need to hear. That wasn't a good example, but
If they have 100 acres and they're trying to move their porch out 3 feet.
right. So you want to talk about what you do and how you help people? And
Yeah, basically, commercial permits have to have a hearing, and residential permits don't, except unless a variance is needed. The way the state statute is written, you can give me the power to do little things on commercial properties, like a roof over a set of steps or that sort of thing. And that's something we really need to add, because it's ridiculous when we have to have a hearing for some tiny little change. And I have given permits for those things, although if anyone challenged them in court, they could say I didn't have the authority to give those. But that's basically it. It's anything but a 1 and 2 family home has to have a hearing.
And I think what's important about what you just said was that sometimes, like, we had something with last summer where they wanted to add a couple more parking spaces where you go in. And if we were going to hold a hearing, get the notice out and blah, 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 the summer would have been half over before we would have been even able to hear what they were going to do. So that's one of the cases where we'll just we talked about it, and we'll just allow those extra parking spaces to go in on the way in. But it would be nice if we have it in here in our zoning regulations, that it's okay that he does that. So, and other towns do that. So anyway, so then there's what our group does, what the DRB does is, if we hardly ever see any single family homes unless, as Will said, somebody needs a variance.
They're too tall.
Yeah. So we mostly see commercial stuff. And we see things that, well, let me go back just another step. Under our zoning regulations, uses are either permitted or conditional. Permitted uses are permitted as long as they meet dimensional requirements. Conditional uses require a hearing by the Development Review Board. And it is interesting, I spent some time in the last month looking at what uses in Weston are permitted and what uses are conditional. And they're kind of cuckoo, because certain things that are actually permitted seem to me less intensive. I mean, I'm sorry, more intensive than some of those things that are conditional use. And so that seems crazy, you know, if we're gonna let something be permitted, maybe we do want, maybe it is something that needs more of a look-see versus something that's conditional. If it's less intensive than something that's permitted, you know, anyway, that it's just an interesting thing, which maybe, I don't know that we would go, we being us, would go through and look at all those different uses with an idea of recommending to them, because that's really more their bailiwick, like deciding what uses should be allowed in what districts and that kind of stuff. That's really more planning commission stuff, but pointing out to them that some of the uses, I mean, like for example, I think like a tour, I'm not remembering, but like a tourist home needs a conditional use, but an inn is a permitted use. So, you know, why?
And a tourist home has the owner living there, so it's.
Yeah, so I could even be the wrong example, but the idea is, you know, you have to sort of figure out, well, why would we make them jump through hoops here, but not here? Anyway, so, and then the other two things where our group meets is if there's somebody asking for a variance, if Will has made a ruling and they appeal that ruling, it comes to us. That hasn't happened a whole lot.
McKenna's the only one I can think of.
Okay, yeah. And then the
No,
last one,
actually, that was.
it just kind
was
of bubbled
McKenna's,
up.
yeah.
And the last thing is, which we found out on the both McKenna's and I think on the Lindgren, the subdivision, was where the applicant actually asked for a relook, you know, like you made your decision, but can you actually, would you be willing to reconsider that that decision? So there's certain things like that. The other thing is, and I think this is something we don't have to address yet, and maybe we can address it as we go along, but we've, as the zoning board, we always sort of took this position, and that's because I think we only heard those various small things, that we didn't actually sit and meet with an applicant to discuss what their application was. But we ought to talk about whether we should do that. Do other towns do that?
It's usually the zoning administrator.
Okay, well, good. All right, then, good. That seems good. Oh,
Except for a subdivision,
okay.
you have a major subdivision would have the three. Actually, the new Londonderry bylaws, the site plan. What are the three steps of the subdivision?
Sketch plan.
Sketch plan.
And
in
then
the
preliminary plat. And
Right, so
final
the
plat.
ZA can do the sketch plan or the whole board can do the
Yeah.
sketch plan.
The other thing is, one last thing in terms of our regulations, we have subdivision regulations and we have zoning regulations. I would really like them to be made into one, because I think it's really a pain in the neck remember when we were doing our subdivision regulations, you have to looking for the sub and then you're looking through the zoning regulations and it's a royal pain in the neck.
And when you do that, eventually you can become a 10-acre town for Act 250, which means the town has more control over development.
If you haven't joined me.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are, that's where we are. So what Will did, and that's this document that kind of looks like this. I think people have that, but it doesn't matter if you do or you don't. We got through to signs. Okay, which is signs are section 550. And so what, I just have one sort of general observation, which I don't know, and I'm asking Will this mostly because he does other towns. It seems as if our sign regulations are really long.
They're really long.
And they're almost like as long
And no
as.
one follows them.
Right.
And then this like well, I shouldn't say, put it that way. And then there's a reluctance to enforce them.
And so I think there needs, I'm not quite sure that today is necessarily the day to like go through and, or maybe what we ask is somebody, either Will or somebody else who might want to do that, to go through the signs and maybe take a look at like another town's signs or something, because it's really amazing how involved and, you know, confused they are. The other thing that's interesting is, and I'm running into this, well, I won't use the example, but buildings are only supposed to have, like, structures are only supposed to have one sign.
Properties are.
Properties are only supposed to have one sign, okay? And so if you think about it, that hasn't been a problem because every business in town, there's just one business on the property. But if you did run into a situation where
We're making a tree with signs.
if you did run into a situation where there were two businesses in that property, there's nothing in here that really allows for the two signs. And that's also compounded by the fact that, well, I mean, it was started by the fact that Weston, as they developed the sign ordinance, because the sign ordinance is probably only about, I don't know, 20 years old, something like that. It went in.
It's a newborn.
But the whole premise behind when they adopted that sign ordinance was, we really don't want our town to have like a gazillion signs in it all over the place. And so that's why we said, like, we only want to have one sign per property. There's also a state law which you can't have what's called off premises signs. And that's actually why Vermont looks different than New Hampshire, because as you know, we don't have any billboards in Vermont because you can't have a sign off your premise. You can only have a sign on your premise. So, you know, theoretically, you couldn't have a sign at the beginning of, at the end of as you enter Weston that said Vermont Country Store ahead. You know, that would be an off-premise sign for a business that's up there. So anyway, those are kind of around policy things, but are in Londonderry and stuff, are there signs as crazy as this?
Not quite. But, you know, close.
They have more commercial businesses
Yeah.
than we have also. So
And they have a big shopping
shopping
plaza.
center, gas station.
Well, and then another sort of thing that gets raised by people, we don't allow internally illuminated signs, and yet I think our gas station is internally illuminated.
It's grandfather.
Oh, okay.
And there's one on the theater, which was granted in error, but you can't see it from anywhere.
No.
So
It's even crazier than that, because you're allowed to have an illuminated sign if the letters are lit and the background is dark, I think.
oh,
So there's something very counterintuitive. It's illuminated within, unless opaque material, so that only the letters are illuminated, and such area of illumination does not exceed 50%. What is the point of having?
That's like a backlit, so
mhm.
you can have raised letters and backlight them on a board, basically is what they're allowing.
Yeah.
It's kind of classy.
You can get us our art too. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you know, I think size has something to do with, you know,
Yeah.
the desirability or lack thereof of
So-
an illuminated sign.
So do people come to you for sign permits?
Yes.
Oh,
Not in other towns. There haven't been
Oh.
that many new signs, and
Yeah, in Weston for,
but the Vermont Country Stores come a couple of times, and I've allowed them to have separate signs for Bryant House.
and now Layla's. So,
And one of the reasons is because there's another business in town that has many, many more signs than they're allowed. And
well,
I can't make the Vermont Country Store. I can't hold them to a much, much, much stricter standard than the person on the same street.
well, and I guess also there's always been the question as to whether, is like merchandise sitting outside a sign?
And you can, there are towns that have bylaws that say you can't have merchandise sitting outside overnight. You have to take it in every day.
Anyway, well, fortunately, we have to figure that out. But anyway, all right, so signs, oh, and then also explain back when they adopted these ordinances, because there wasn't any, or sign regulations, I guess there wasn't sign law before that. But what happened was all the enterprises in town could get grandfathered. So they took pictures of what they had as of the date of that zoning, whatever, what I think it was like, I don't know, 1995 or 8, whatever it was. So those are all grandfathered in.
Until they fall apart.
Okay. Okay.
Until they fall apart, so the.
If you replace the sign, you have to
Yeah.
reapply for the permit. And
Replace
if
and
you
it-
replace the same sign that's there,
I believe that's the way a non-conforming sign, you would have to bring it into conformity, but I may be mixing my towns.
Oh, that seems.
Yeah, that's one of the areas where
strange.
non-conformities don't last forever, is signs.
Okay.
So, okay,
Did not
so
know
looking
that.
at signs, Will is suggesting like in section 550 to take out the word alterations, because we're not allowing alterations.
No, I'm saying that you should be able to replace the sign
Oh, okay.
with a sign of the same size.
Okay, and then there's 3 types of signs: the freestanding, the projecting signs, and the mounted flush signs. So I understand what a freestanding sign is. A projecting sign, does that come off the building? Or
It's
does that come off the sign, the other? sign?
perpendicular to the building.
Okay,
Before you get that far, the word enterprise, if you're trying to only, are we trying to limit it only to 1 sign per spot, location?
No, I would say,
Because enterprise will get you 7 businesses in 1 building, gets you 7 signs.
right?
but on the other hand, shouldn't the Vermont Country Store and Bryan House both be able to have signs? I mean,
Yeah, no.
But
I'm
it'll be
not-
1 sign per building, maybe.
Right.
That way, if it's 1 building, you have multiple
Right,
tenants, you can
right.
put them all in 1 sign.
Right,
Bryan House is separate from Vermont Country Store property, and now it's a restaurant.
so maybe instead of
Well, isn't it a
enterprise,
separate
it's the
business
structure,
anyway?
per structure, per building.
no,
Yeah.
actually,
enterprise seems really
the
broad.
Vermont
is my
Country
point.
Store has taken it back over.
Layla's,
Layla's,
they've had already.
I believe.
Oh, that was
I never even
2 weeks
tried
ago.
it.
We were talking to him 2 weeks ago, and he was thinking of expanding. So
I
there we
saw,
go.
I
Oh,
saw an
really?
email today that I,
Never got there. 3 jobs, you know?
Right, the 3 jobs.
So what do we, so we
I
think
haven't
we want to go back, do we want to say per
per building.
building?
That would make sense.
And can I just back up for 1 minute to the alteration?
But then
deletion?
someone could put up a shed simply for the purpose of having a sign.
You have devious
Then
people.
what does premise mean? Does that lot?
Right. Anyways, that has to be,
Yeah, property.
Well,
I can look around and see what other towns.
okay,
Then I can subdivide and put another sign up.
yeah, let's
What about
just kind of
signs?
take a look and see what other, again, in some respects under signs, this is not an area that we've necessarily had trouble with, but I think it would be good to point out to the, rather than suggest exactly what language they need to have, but point out to them that this is an area where you could address. But if you have time to look and see what they do in other towns.
So can I just back up to alteration being taken out? So someone could theoretically alter a sign in a way that would be maybe not as we would want them to be if we are not. Look, I know they have to comply with the rest of the zoning regulations for signs, but I just feel like if that's taken out, there's a potential for, having it be.
Right, I mean, I guess you could
could
make it a backlit
argue-
sign.
Right, you
Yeah.
could argue that I'm altering, this is an alteration, but it's completely changed. It's, the way it looks. I don't know if taking out
Right,
alteration is maybe allowing more room for things without alterations, without coming before you, or because it's, I think it could be like a loophole almost. So if there's a way to add a definition
right.
of alteration, and keep it in, but it's only an alteration if X, Y, and Z kind of thing.
Mhm.
Just, that's my only
Yep.
thought.
I don't know this building very well. Which one's the bathroom?
Oh, it's like
Yeah.
right around by the stairs.
Secret
don't know.
It's
door.
underneath, you can't miss it. It's right,
Okay.
yeah.
I didn't even
Um,
know there was a bathroom.
So Deb, I had a quick question for you, just kind of on what we're gonna be giving the planning commission. Like you just said, we could just tell them they need to look at it versus giving them a suggestion. I guess it hits me, this more, especially when we spend a lot of time going in circles talking about something. They don't have to listen to us, but the more we can
Oh.
make that suggestion
I,
and not just say, you guys need to look at it. I didn't know where you were going.
yeah, no, my thought is that if we don't come up with
Mhm.
a coherent or a good suggestion that we think, then we can just say, like, be sure to look at this. No, I mean, the thing that I sent around really was like proposed, based on what we've done so far, proposed language for them to be
Yeah.
considering, so,
Mhm.
and frankly, that's what I guess I would like to get, if I were in their shoes, I'd like to see the language.
Yeah, because it's a huge undertaking.
Mhm,
It's gonna be a huge undertaking doing a full rewrite.
mhm.
Yeah, and I think when you and I went to that meeting, and it wasn't the whole planning commission, but they were very reluctant, like they were very vocal about the fact that they had no idea about zoning, and they were a little bit
Yeah.
sensitive to doing anything, without really guidance
And the
from us.
other issue is consultant fever, where
Right,
people hire a consultant
that's
and
another thing,
and
yeah.
stand behind their consultant, even when this is what happened in Londonderry, and Chester. The consultant really came up with something that did not fit the towns.
Yeah, I mean, I'm jumping here, but this kind of goes back to one of the reasons that I think that I feel like we can be helpful in doing this. I did a deep dive into our zoning regulations, certain sections, and it's not that they're repetitive, but there's like little individual sections that could be put together and made into like one thing. This is, well, there was around, we're gonna get to this, around landscaping and screening. There's about like 4 or 5 different places
Right.
in the zoning regulations that,
And last time we talked about the difference between highway access and driveways and
Right,
private
right,
roads.
and that all could get put into, like, there's one area about highway access and frontage and this, and then driveways, and if it all got put into one place, so that somebody who then says like, oh, I'm putting in a driveway, everything is right here, as opposed to like having to go to this section, this
Mhm.
section, that section, and that section. And as a matter of fact, one of the areas that I must confess, even after all the many years that I was on the board, I had no idea was that 100-foot setback from the river, because that's like, there's this requirement that any development be 100 feet setback from a water course, and it's buried in like some weird
It's
place.
just sort of a general catch-all
And I
section with
never
4 things
actually
in it.
even seen it
Hmm.
before. So it's that kind of trying to find those things and get stuff into a sense, so that when you're trying to build something, you don't all of a sudden go, oh my God, I didn't see that thing
Right.
way over there. That affects this. So anyway, All right, so back to, projecting signs, what you're proposing or what's proposed here is that they can have a freestanding sign. And so I think, would we really, I'm not worried about the language at the moment yet, but what would we, or what we saying with respect to the freestanding sign? All right, so if the little school, for example, wanted to have like a daycare center in there too, all right, but it's not, it's like the Joe Blow Daycare Center. It's a separate organization.
I don't think that would be a good name for the.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Let's see, Alice in Wonderland.
That might have
The
been.
unicorn Cinderella sign.
Okay. All right, so are we saying that they can then have two freestanding signs, or do we want one sign with things hanging on it?
Yeah, that's the tricky thing. And some towns have a rule that if there's multiple properties, multiple enterprises on a property, you can have one big sign for the whole property and then little signs. Actually, that's the way Weston's is written, little signs for the different enterprises in the property.
Mm.
Let me also go back. Is the Vermont Country Store using, because there's an example where there's two different signs. There's the Vermont Country Store and there's Layla's. So is it all one giant parcel, or is it, oh, so
And the gallery is,
Mhm.
part of it too?
yeah.
That has its own
Oh, and that
sign.
has its own signs too.
So I think whoever writes the final language for the number of signs at a enterprise or a property is gonna have to look at all the things in Weston and say, you know, what is the most Weston-y?
Right, so actually, the way that with using Susan's suggestion of like a building there, in under 552(1)(a), that would mean that under my example of the little school and the Alice in Wonderland daycare, there would only be one sign.
I think.
Right, it could have things hanging on it, but it's only one sign, whereas because Layla's is a separate building and the gallery is a separate building, they're each allowed to have a sign. Okay, so projecting signs,
Wyndham, believe it or not, has no sign bylaws.
they don't have any commercial
Yeah,
anything, do
yeah.
they?
Right, but it
They're
just
not-
seems
There's a
strange. to
library
have
and a
those.
school, and that's about it.
That's
Yeah.
a playground, yeah.
Like some, I know, when, because I was looking at some other town signs, I don't know what ours says about this, but you can't have like a subdivision sign. You know, it can't be like the
Mhm.
Happy Valley subdivision or something. All right, so projecting sign, they come off of the building. And so we're saying, is there one projecting sign permitted per building then? Would that also be per building?
You know, I think these are all gonna have to be hashed through.
Okay, all right,
And if I'm reading this right, I could have a freestanding sign, a projecting sign,
Mhm.
and a flush mounted
Yep.
sign all
Yeah,
on
you
my
could have them
building.
all.
I'm just,
No, I'm just saying the way it's,
that's the way I did it, because I think the bylaws are too restrictive and too complex, the way they're written now. So that was just a
I
simplification.
feel like there should be an or in between each of these, like I can have one
Well-
of these, or one of these, or one of these.
Or
I think
you
it's-
allow two, do you allow freestanding
Right.
on the
Yeah.
road and the
Right.
building can
Yeah,
have a
unless-
sign?
right.
yeah.
So Bryan House could have Layla and Vermont
So-
Country Store, but I agree with you,
So
the way
maybe
it's
what we
written,
ought
they
to
could have
do,
3 signs on every building.
I'm gonna suggest that we take, we could spend a lot of time on signs without a lot of background. So let's take an opportunity to, whoever wants to do a little deep dive into some sign stuff. And when we meet again, whoever wants to bring in something about signs, let me know and and I will do something too, and Will wants to too, so that, because I think we could get really bogged down in
Mhm.
signs.
There's a
Yeah.
lot, there are a lot of sign regulations, as you
Yeah.
And
said,
yeah,
a
that's
lot.
why it's so long, is it
And we
is
have 4
complicated.
stores. I mean, I know this is planning for the future, but it just, yeah.
Well, I don't think we're gonna have a lot of stores even in the future.
Don't say that.
New bakery.
A new bakery. Right.
Don't say that.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
All right, so let's talk generally about, let's move from signs and put that on hold for the time being. Moving on to landscaping, okay. There's 570, 571, but there's other places too that has landscaping.
540.
And, 540, okay. And so let's talk just sort of generally about landscaping and screening. So we have found, we being the DRB, has found that the way landscaping and screening is set up, it's very defined in terms of what it has to be. There's no real ability for the zoning administrator or the DRB to because they say landscaping or screening shall be the following, as opposed to the DRB could take into account the conditions of the area and that kind of stuff. So there's no way for the DRB to make any kind of judgments based on the condition of the property. And there's also sections, and this is where it became, we had a difficult situation where there's confusing language. In one place, it says that you have to have a buffer of 25 feet between residential and a parking lot or something like that. And another place it says 15 feet. And let's also go back a second to figure out where our zoning regulations came from. They came from suburban Ohio. And what they were, in my view, what they were trying to protect against was, a Walmart going up next to your house. So you really wanted to make sure you were hugely screened and protected from a Walmart going up next to your house. The way our zoning regulations have been put into effect is that even for the village, where everything is like this, you now need, if you went by strictly with your zoning regulations, you need 25 feet between you and one neighbor on this side and 25 feet on this side. There's 50 feet of a property that doesn't really even have very much frontage. And so do we really want and think we need 50 feet in the small part of our village?
Should the village district have its separate screening requirements?
Right, in a way, it's almost like the only place where.
Because everywhere else it would work, right?
Right.
Hasn't really been an issue.
Right, like we think about like a home occupation, for example, or a home business. If you have a home business that, not a home occupation, because home occupations, although I suppose you could even do parking, you could even do setbacks and screening on a home business, not home occupation. But if you have a home, if your house is here and you have somebody that comes in that wants to start running a business next to you, and they're going to have a lot of cars there, you do want screening of some sort, I would think. But if you're in the village, and it kind of seems to me that there's an expectation that if you're in the village, there's going to be parking and buildings and trying to find. I mean, we ran into this problem with the bakery.
Okay.
Because
Yeah, I know that was
Residential.
we granted the 15 feet. We wanted the 15 feet, and the neighbor, this is all public knowledge, so it's nothing. So the neighbor appealed that decision to the environmental court, and they didn't end up reviewing it because the owner of the bakery said, all right, we'll just do the 25 feet. We don't care. It gives us less parking for you guys, but we'll do the 25 feet. And it was kind of crazy because 25 feet on either end of everything there was kind of
Yeah,
difficult. So I'm just saying that we really, I'd like to see this whole section kind of put into a way that makes it, gives more leeway to the DRB to assess, like, for example, it says like the kind of stuff that you should screen with are trees planted, you know, this close together that are gonna grow to be 50 feet tall,
mhm,
and they're gonna totally block, you know, the neighbor from the neighbor, which might be fine if you were trying to be blocked against a Walmart, but if you're in the village and you're trying to block against
And certainly
something,
you don't want that on the street side.
no,
Right.
no, because then you, it just doesn't make sense. So I looked at some other towns and and I didn't take the opportunity to write down what they do, but they put in a lot more about like, what's the condition of the neighborhood? What does the neighborhood look like?
mhm.
And you should be able to have, the DRB should be able to approve, they should provide us with a landscaping plan. And then the DRB should be able to assess whether that works in that particular place or not. Like, I remember many years ago when Carrie Chalmers was on our DRB, and she used to get so mad because she just hated the notion of like all these tall spruce trees getting planted in the village next to each other. And she said, you know, why don't you screen more naturally with things like lilac bushes or something, you know, that provide some level of screening, but it's not, you know, this tight thing. Or, and our zoning regulations all say, you know, you could do it with a, you know, 6 foot or 8 foot high fence. Well, again, I don't think we want
Yeah.
6 or 8 foot high fences all
Yeah,
around
I
our
don't think that either.
village. So I don't know, what do people think?
Well, I think obviously the intent of this is to have an actual barrier, like an evergreen, it's not a lilac bush, but I think, I mean, it's sort of a slippery slope for us to decide what's a good
Right.
planting.
That turns us into landscape experts.
Yeah, that's the issue, like, I don't, you know,
But
I
in a
don't
way,
think that we
have to-
should.
We have a little bit of that already, because like, for example, in a site plan, they have to prove to us that there's not gonna be increased traffic.
Mhm.
So. I
It
don't know.
wasn't part of the one over there by the bakery that what they planted at one point, that the neighbor didn't feel that that was the right thing to plant.
Right,
There's huge gaps between the trees they
But they'll
plant.
But they'll
grow.
grow.
They're gonna be humongous.
that's the
like, they're gonna
thing,
grow.
right now,
No,
there's a
but
huge gap,
when-
but there will be.
When
grow.
screening is really critical, like for a dumpster,
Right.
you don't wanna have a tree and a tree and you can see the dumpster in the
Right,
middle.
right.
But that's also, you know, getting back to the expectations you have to have when you live in a commercially zoned district, even though it's a little village like that, you know, that was a whole
And
sticky
shouldn't dumpsters
wicket.
have fences around them anyways?
Well, it's,
And maybe a gate to just block them completely versus regular landscape.
right, that can be an option. I mean, that could. be
Yeah,
on
have,
the
I
you
mean,
know.
just for that specific item.
Yeah.
The only thing I would push back on big trees is you plant them on the border.
Hmm.
10 years from now, half of the tree is gonna be in the neighbor's
Right.
property,
Right,
and then they're
Then
gonna,
they go and cut it.
and then they come in,
Right.
and now you're left with something that
Yeah,
looks
that's
like
right.
crap.
right.
We had a situation, I don't know that any of you were on the board when this happened, but the parking lot, that used to be an inn up there, right? The Wilder Homestead Inn. So it was a commercial business, and its parking lot was over and across the way. And so the parking lot abutted the house that is way back over there. I mean, in the sense that it was on the same property. I mean, the parking lot was way up here and the other house was way over here. So this was actually happened even before I went on the board. So they needed to screen that parking lot, and they put in white pines. And I'm sure the white pines were pretty small when they went in, and then they became really big.
Mhm.
And of course, you know what happens to white pines, the bottom
Yeah, they all
Stuff
die out. and
disappears,
Right,
okay?
yeah, yeah.
So so there was a lot of screening up here, but there was no screening down here. And then at one point, one of the owners of the Wild Homestead and didn't like all that scraggly stuff, so they cut it all up to really high. And then there was a complaint about that. And then they all got torn out and got planted with those cedars that and fencing.
That's right.
So, again, you sort of have to think about what are we really trying to accomplish?
Is there any notion of having a, suggested list or an acceptable list of plantings that you can use for screening?
There's the person who wrote the Londonderry bylaws that didn't pass was a landscape architect, and she had this whole formula where there's a table of planting units, and every so many feet had to have so many planting units of stuff. And I think
It's hard.
it's easier, I think,
That
to,
sounds a little different than what I'm referring to, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
no, I think, and also she required that you have a plan done by a landscape architect, which there's 2 or 3 in the state.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know, I think,
Well, the thing is,
Well,
like,
if you knew that white pines, for instance, were gonna
Right.
not be a long-term, solution, then that would be wouldn't be on the list of acceptable
Right.
plants that you could use for screening.
yeah, I mean,
But
like,
again, even if you chose from an acceptable plant list, does it achieve the goal of screening
right,
in the way that the regulation says it needs to?
which is evergreen
Well,
as opposed to
I
things that
guess-
are not, because that's not gonna be all year.
I guess the question
I don't
is,
know,
that
it's-
you hit on is like, what is the definition of screening?
Hmm.
And what things need to be screened? Like,
Mhm.
for example, as Toby said, like
Right,
a dumpster
dumpsters.
should be screened.
Mhm.
But do cars theoretically need to be screened?
Probably not.
And or if they do, theoretically, something that
Yeah.
comes this high
Does it?
Right,
is
not
gonna,
something that's gonna grow to
is
40 feet
screened,
and
is
become
gonna
20 feet
screen
at the
because
base.
you're talking about
Mhm.
the lights and
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
And you could put in some sort of guidance that whatever you plant should, upon maturity, should not be taller than X without getting into plant varieties.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Um,
And you have things like rhododendrons and stuff that
Mhm.
aren't
That's a
evergreens
good
that
idea.
keep your leaves on all the time.
because you
Yeah.
can't, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, to have all, there's a lot of
Can't
things out
have a
there,
list
there's
of
deer
accepted
resistance, there's
things.
non-deer resistance and whatever. but
Right.
You don't really wanna get there.
Yeah.
We all
So
know.
let's, generally, do we think we want to have maybe, a different sort of guidelines, rules, whatever, for the village area?
I think you should have different
Yes.
setbacks for the village.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And then where the other places where there's gonna end up screening that's not in the village is gonna be in the commercial zoning district and in the industrial zoning district,
Mhm.
and also in between where home businesses get set up next to a residence in residential areas. So I'm sort of thinking there's gonna be one thing for the village,
Mhm.
maybe a separate thing. The commercial district is up by the Rod and Gun Club
Mhm.
and down by,
industrial is,
oh, so
West
commercial's
Island.
just up there.
Yeah.
So the commercial district is up by the Rod and Gun Club, but it covers houses too. I mean, it's, right?
yeah,
It's there. And then the industrial district is down where the McKenna's house is at the island where,
Down on the island, is that industrial down there?
yeah.
Where the kind of landfill crap is.
Yes.
Dump and
Yeah,
cheese
dump,
and
yeah.
all
We don't
that.
have any
more
regulations
cheese,
against
though.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
There was a
there's
battle
no,
for a while.
there's
No more
no
cheese.
regulations. Actually, I can't even think of what they're called now. What are they called? Whatever. Eyesore ordinance, no, it's.
Yeah.
But that has to be adopted by the select board. That's an ordinance as opposed to a zoning
No, I
regulation.
And then you're
And-
controlling what
I'll just
people
ask a
do in their front
Oh,
yard,
it's
which
been-
is a whole.
It's been covered.
What
What's
is it?
the-
What
what's-
is what is the word? It's like a I can't think of the
Yeah,
word
I
either.
can't think of the
I
word.
know.
It'll come to me
Anyway.
tonight.
What's the pushback and have somebody submit, it doesn't have to be a landscape architect. Any of the landscape companies around here will have a draftsman
Mhm.
that could draft a site plan.
Mhm.
To me, that would make more sense to have them just draft a site plan and then get it approved, and then you don't have to worry about picking out this shrub is right and this shrub isn't right.
I think that certainly has been the way that, well, no. Like the bakery did do
Yeah,
a
they did a
very
beautiful,
detailed plan.
beautiful plan.
Yeah.
They really did rain catch off and
Yeah.
screening. It was very well done.
Right.
It was.
The before that, there was the New Thought Vermont, which didn't really have a any kind of detailed plan. So, but yeah, I mean,
I mean, that way you can present it to the neighbor before you start planting, and then you get into a whole fight.
yeah.
And the neighbor could say, sure, that seems fine, and then you can move forward.
Right.
That just seems simpler.
Well,
to me.
here that sort of did happen, but the neighbor didn't.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
it's
there's
what you're
always
gonna,
gonna be
you don't
those
know who's
kind of
gonna be your
neighbors.
neighbor.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
Okay, so back to this thing was, so we have a village district, we have, which is gonna be simpler and more like. What's your surrounding neighborhood your neighbors look like, okay? Then there's the commercial district and the industrial district, which I think could have some of the requirements that we have, you know, that there is more of a setback. That there is, but again, I still think screening should be commensurate with what's happening, because you know, having 50-foot trees
Mhm.
next to something like this is
Yeah.
just not
Yeah. I agree.
necessary.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole area, there's the whole other section, other area to think about, which is when a commercial type business, so a home business, pops up next to a residence.
Mhm.
And so if a home business pops up next to a residence, that's gonna have to have site plan review, right? So that would give us the
Mhm.
opportunity through site plan review to assess their plan.
Mhm.
And again, maybe their plan at that point is somewhere in between. Between what would happen in commercial and industrial and what would happen in the village.
Yeah.
You
Depends
know?
on how many, like if there are more cars on site in the
Right.
day and
So,
the setback from
so
the other
just
house.
for your edification, a home occupation is a permitted use, sort of sanctioned by the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont very much wants people to be able to have a home occupation in their house. And it specifically says in state statute that it has to be in their house, or I think now it can be in an ADU, but it has to be on the property. And it has to be clearly subordinate to the residential use. And it has to be something that's in keeping with what would happen in your neighborhood. And oftentimes I like to describe it as like, most times when somebody's having a home occupation, their neighbors don't actually even know
That's me.
that they
Home
have, right?
occupation.
I mean,
All those monitors, they can't see me.
right, I mean, my husband and I had a home occupation because we had a consulting business and it was in there and nobody, you know,
Mhm.
we maybe had one client a year come in, no. But, you know, it's kind of like you're not bothering your neighbor. The next level up is a home business, and that's not, it's not sanctioned, if you will, by the state, but most towns have said, okay, we're gonna allow home occupation. But what's that next sort of intensive use that can be done in a home that doesn't totally disrupt the next door neighbor or the neighborhood? And it used to be that one of the triggers on that, the number of employees you had under a home occupation. Our law, our regulation said you only could have the people in your house working on the home occupation. Will is proposing, which is other towns have gone to allow a couple of employees in a home occupation. That's a question for discussion. But where the problem arises and where it'd be nice to get this sort of settled and get it settled in terms of, do people have to apply for people are supposed to apply for a home business, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So where it comes into play is
And
you
there
can
has to
well
be a
imagine.
home. I don't know, did we talk about that? Cause there's some
Does it
that,
depend on the zoning in town? So I mean, for residential, can you have a business in a residential? Where people come on the property
Mhm.
and
Yes.
vehicles come on and off the property?
Yeah.
That's allowed.
Limited amount, yeah.
Okay.
So, but so where it's become a real issue is for lawns,
Yeah,
lawns
that's what I was thinking,
people,
if
you
there's-
know.
Well, right,
they're
because all of a
using
sudden you've got
trucks.
equipment and
Yeah.
you've got crews coming in and out and a lot of vehicles. So
Yeah.
that's what I was wondering.
Right, and so there's a lot, there's not a lot of anything in Weston, but there's several home occupation, or sorry, home businesses, landscape businesses in Weston, that, and they're almost all grandfathered to some extent, right? They've been around for a really long time.
There's only one I can think of that's grandfather.
Oh, okay. Okay, but it's an issue, and then,
so they don't, the ones that are here that are not grandfathered, they don't have to apply for anything. Because they have, at least one, doesn't have a building, doesn't have a home, but is operating on the property that way,
Mhm.
right? Okay, so they fall outside our regulation, is that what we want?
no, and that's why when we get
But
into.
he happened to be given a house
Mhm.
in another part of town. That's why he's not living there.
Yeah.
Right.
It gets back to that, as we know, that balancing between the right of
Mm.
one landowner and the
Right,
right of
right,
another landowner, and also what's the public good.
And the willingness of the town to lawyer up.
The home occupation that we're referring to, is that where the trucks are? Is there a house there?
No, there was a plan for a house there. I mean, there was a permit granted for a house there, but then he
Yeah, I know.
was given this
Given a
other
house.
house.
That I
But
know,
that's
but
not
I
really a
didn't,
home occupation, that's really a home business,
that's
right?
a business.
Yeah.
Except there's no home, so.
But
It's
then
not
what-
even a home business, it's just a
Right, and
business
then they would say
business.
that they don't need to apply for the home
It's just a
business permit because
business.
there's no
But maybe-
home.
But they wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get it.
But maybe we,
Will
ought-
Perkins.
what do we wanna define it, that it would
He's
have,
mine.
that there has to be a home?
I know.
But then it
I,
becomes.
I think it is defined.
No, I mean, do we want to make it that it has to have a home?
No, wouldn't you wanna make it so it doesn't have to have a home?
So it's a business.
So what if we just bought some acreage on 100 and I just ran a business there with a bunch of temporary structures? But I don't have a home, so I'm good, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you don't really need to have a home,
Ah,
but then I don't even have to get a permit.
Right, and then you don't need a septic system.
I don't need anything, I'm just gonna, but is that what we want? I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't sound right.
no.
No, it doesn't.
No.
and then as Will more than alluded to, the question of when there are zoning violations and what the town wants to do about that. And fortunately, I guess, those of us that sit from here down have nothing to do with zoning violations, which leaves. So, yeah,
Mhm.
it's not easy, right?
You know, no. It's easy to ignore, or it's easy to sick the lawyers, but there's sort of a gray area in between, which is.
So, all right, I got a general idea of what we want to do with landscaping and screening and.
So would you be proposing to like move everything together? One
Yes.
thing would be called screening
Yes.
and it's this, it's
And
this.
then
Yeah, and I'm
define the
I
districts.
found a town that had just something really kind of
Okay.
interesting, so I'll do, and maybe one of your towns was? No, okay, I found. the
No,
town.
I actually did a major rewrite of my own to Londonderry's. And Langroves in Peru because I couldn't find anybody.
Oh, well, all right, well, if you wanna
Okay.
give us that, that would be good too.
One of the things I noticed and noted in here was, it talks about, at least 25 feet in width as a landscape and utility area.
We would get rid of that because
Yeah,
no
I
one
would
knew
hope
what
so.
that meant.
Mhm.
That's,
My note was needs to define this better.
But that's
That
what
could be a
the
real problem.
the bakery problem,
Mhm.
the neighbor of the bakery appealed based on that passage.
yeah, cause it's someplace else, Larry, there's a 15-foot, but then there's this 25-foot buffer area. And there's also, let me ask you another question. What about the notion that you have to have a loading area? You know, I mean, a place for a giant loading truck to come. I mean, not every business.
No, I think if you're not having trucks coming in and out, I don't think you're required to have a loading area.
Oh, okay, well, I
But
think
also,
that loading, that whole thing should go in this one
okay.
area. I mean, I think that loading thing should, well, either that or that
So-
goes in parking, right?
Right, it's in parking now.
Okay, so what does it say?
And then the other, the new Londonderry bylaws say if you're in the village and it can be done safely, you can load and unload from the street. The one problem with that is
Yeah.
there is a business in town where the road commissioner feels that the loading and unloading in the street is blocking a side street
Mhm.
or
Mm.
causing a hazard on a side street.
In Londonderry.
No,
In
in
Oh,
West.
in Weston, okay.
Oh, really?
Cause I've seen the
And it-
whole half truck in the middle of the street in Londonderry. I'm like, all right,
Right.
swing around there.
No, at one of the restaurants in Weston
Okay.
unloads in the street.
There's
And
one restaurant.
One of the high-end restaurants.
That would be the high-end restaurant.
The only, okay.
The hub closed, as you know. for
The
dinner.
hub is closed now.
I
Unfortunately.
can't keep
It will
track
be-
of
It
it.
is, it's closed.
It will
And
be,
they're only
Mine's
gonna
gone,
do
right?
lunches
Mike
Mike
and
is gone.
breakfast.
I have to get out
Oh.
more.
So it's not a seasonal closure, it's a.
No,
It's
they're
a-
moving
it's
to
a-
breakfast and lunch only from
yeah,
what the email I saw.
they're doing a
Right,
different
and then-
model.
But they will have dinners here and there, but not like a regular
Right.
dinner service anymore.
Right.
So, but I mean, you have to think about, like, for example, like when with the library, there is no, I mean, the libraries does not get deliveries of books.
Right. I think we waived,
Yeah, they did, so
We
they
waived
really
that.
didn't need a loading
right.
dock, they'd have no food coming in or anything. So, and most of the stuff goes to the post office anyway.
It is hard in town here in 100 to block up the road. I mean,
Mm.
that's
What about the bakery?
an issue.
'Cause
They're
they'll
The
be-
bakery has an official,
They have a spot where
Loading
a truck
space.
can pull in,
in the back.
and they share it with the restaurants, since it's all the same owner.
I don't think
And
the
alleviate
truck,
that
I don't think the
problem.
truck, well, actually, the problem with, the problem with the
Yeah.
restaurant
It is.
is they had a site plan approved with not a lot of thought put into it.
Oh,
But they're sticking to they're saying, we have a site plan that's approved. And we approached them saying, after the road commissioner approached me, I approached them and saying, your site plan does say that you will unload off the street. And we had some go-arounds about that, which I don't think has changed much.
Is there a difference between town roads and state roads as far as, because like this is Route 100 state road, on town rules versus state rules?
Yeah, no, you can go to the state, there is one of the butcher shops in Londonderry. Put in I didn't get a laugh for that one. Yeah.
There is one butcher shop.
One of the
in
butcher shops in
Londonderry.
all the same
Londonderry
people again.
put in a fence that was in the state right of way and the state made them move it. So the state, yeah, no, if you tell the state about a problem, they have a lot more authority than the town does. But the problem in Weston is the trucks in the state right of way are causing problems for a town road, so that
And like back to the thing about state versus town, like, Route 100 being a state road. Theoretically, the town doesn't have any control over what happens
That's what I would guess.
there, and we don't pay for plowing or whatever the state pays for plowing
And we
and
can't put,
maintenance. of
we
the
can't
state.
put a crosswalk in Weston because it's a state road.
Well, you can, but you have to get state
Without a
approval.
permit.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Did they use that little, there is a little, road there, isn't that, what road is that?
That's
Mill
side
Lane.
road.
Mill Lane, so that's a town road, right? Do they don't they use that though?
They park
There
on
are
it,
cars there.
and then the
yeah.
more the snow builds up, the further they.
Gotcha, yeah, there's one house and then there's the office, yeah, there's a house back there. I noticed that it's sort of on that road.
But that was an approved site plan back in the 80s, so we can't.
Yeah,
do
that
too
was a
much.
grandfathered
Oh,
business, so we never,
from when it was.
we
again in
never
Weston.
saw that, yeah, they just came for the bakery and then,
Well, you remember they came in with a plan and I said, you need, well, maybe you weren't
No, we
involved.
weren't.
I said,
know.
It was
I don't
other-
think-
it was
Right.
the planning
I
commission.
said you would need a hearing if you change the footprint of the building, so.
Yeah,
they're
we
like,
didn't.
Okay, we're not gonna change the footprint. of the
right,
building."
which is, but the bakery though, we don't know what they're doing because we approved, like, they had a very nice plan and
Mhm.
landscaping and everything, and then, it was held up for so long with the appeal, so it looks kind of like what we
So
approved.
originally it was modifying
But it was-
existing building.
Right, and
Building it,
attaching
do it,
that,
modify it,
that
and that
separate
got
structure.
Okay.
But it doesn't look like there's an apartment in there anymore, right? Doesn't
I
it look
think,
like it's?
yeah, I think
Is there?
the southern
The-
wing is the apartment.
Where that,
It was originally supposed to be
Standalone
upstairs, though.
garage
Was the
was?
different house.
cause it was like, this with the seasonal garden, whatever seating in the front and two kind of wings attaching that. There was a structure and then having kind of
Yeah.
another structure, but I don't know, it's hard to tell if it's
Yeah, cause that
going
was
to
the
comply or be the same.
pastry
as the
chef
site.
was supposed to be living there.
Right. I don't
Still
know,
a
residents there?
but they haven't ever come back to us saying we're changing it.
I
So
hope
we
the
have-
pastries cost.
I know,
the
this
same as
baguette
what they
that I
cost
want is
in
like
in
taking
France,
forever.
where a croissant is €1.50.
I doubt it.
Wishful thinking.
I doubt it.
And an espresso is the same cost.
All right, so, I will do something getting screening, landscaping all kind of into one, thing, okay? The next thing is the, minor subdivision, so your proposal, which I love. Go ahead.
The way the state statute is written now, the planning commission can decide what's a minor subdivision and what's a major subdivision, and then the zoning administrator can do minor subdivision. So you can say 2 lots is a minor subdivision and more than 2 is major, or you can say anything without roads is a minor subdivision and anything with roads is a major subdivision. I would think at a minimum, make 2 lot subdivision a minor subdivision that's no hearing.
That's pretty common here.
A 2 lot
Yeah.
subdivision. I think that's good. It used to be, that a 2 lot subdivision still had to go to us.
It was still a minor, called a minor
It was
subdivision.
called, right,
it had to have
but it had to go to the DRB to be approved, and it's really, the approval of it is, there's no sort of, I don't know, it's not like you do discretion.
Right, it's
It-
pretty,
it-
it's the boom, boom, boom down the
Right, you have to have
criteria.
a survey, you have to have setbacks, you have to have
Septic permit.
septic permit, et cetera, so it's kind of like a checklist of what you need to have, so having a hearing is, but I guess the only question I have about that, is there a reason that a neighbor would wanna know about that, or is that not really? Because the reason to have hearing is because then a neighbor knows about it, but I guess,
Right.
is there any reason that a
I
neighbor
think
would know?
people panic when they hear their neighbors doing a subdivision, then there's been cases where it's just tiniest little 2-lot subdivision and people are all worried because they're getting a subdivision next door, so.
But if
Well, I was
but
a
if he gives a
2-lot
permit,
subdivision.
you have that notice period, assuming they can see it visibly,
Right.
and then they could speak up
Yeah.
then, right?
Yeah, and then there's an appeal period afterwards.
Right.
And the lot still has to meet minimum size.
Yeah.
I guess
for-
if it's
for the
increased
area.
traffic or, the setback is funky from the neighbor because it's closer to the neighbor than, let's say, the, existing 2 lots, so.
I don't know, how do we feel? I mean, would you care if your neighbor did a 2-lot subdivision and you didn't know about it?
I think
Well,
I
if
would.
it met all of the other zoning requirements and didn't need a
Right.
variance of any kind, then
No,
you don't have any basis for complaining about it.
Right, because they can't, I mean, if there's a house there, if this is your lot now and there's a house, you're over here and there's a house over here. That person could move their house over here as long as it
right,
met
There are
the,
minimum lot area requirements for the
right.
zones, right?
Yep.
So then
yeah,
you do all of that stuff, there's no.
You
basis
can't really
to-
put many conditions on a subdivision that doesn't have roads.
right.
It's
Right.
just, it is what it is.
Yeah,
But does the town notify neighbors for building permits, subdivisions, anything at this point?
Anything that requires a hearing.
but
So,
everything else would just be.
everything
you post- you're
commercial
supposed
and
to-
the
you
variance.
post your permit
You do post,
conspicuously.
okay.
Yeah, you have to post your permit.
But that's like an interesting thing in the sense that query whether as we become more digitized. Right now, will you post zoning permits on the wall or something, right? So, but I mean, a person has to come in periodically to see that.
Mhm.
Query whether we
Put
would
'em on
want
the
to have them on the website too, what
Yeah, that's just a question of bullying someone into uploading them. The program for the town website is just awful to wrangle.
Is that gonna change?
Someone would have to decide to change it.
Yeah, I guess part of what I'm getting at here is the notion of fairness,
Mhm.
to both the applicant and to neighbors, I mean, I'm not sure that I would feel like there needs to be a hearing for a minor subdivision, but I guess I might like to know that my neighbor is doing a minor subdivision, and if there were a more, I don't know, just think about that, a more formalized way of letting people know when things happen.
Yeah, I think, not having, we don't wanna overregulate, I guess that's what our goal is, I guess at the end of the day, cause this is so much, but I think since it's a small town and if you did subdivide, I think if you were a neighbor, you would want
Mhm.
to know,
Yes.
even if you're within, the regulations, I think because taking into account the smallness of this town and what we're trying to accomplish, I think we should think about that because I think your neighbors would want to know, and then you slippery slope of, well, how much can they complain or stop you from doing something? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that's the
so
other.
does the subdivision require the same kind of posting that a building permit does?
No,
If-
a major subdivision requires, well, actually, any subdivision now requires an ad in the newspaper. And
So
then,
if I've got a lot and I'm gonna split it in two, like 2 lots, I have to put it in a newspaper. And do I
And
need to
then-
post a sign
Well,
out
well,
there on
we,
the
I
property?
mean,
the abutters get letters.
The butters do get one. That's my only
Well,
point,
yeah,
is that
so
I just think it's
somebody
fair that
knows.
butters get
They
letters.
do. My lot, for example, was subdivided before I bought it. So it had a hearing. I recused myself, my husband came, but the neighbors were all notified, but nobody objected, but I have,
Well, if you keep people informed, then I think you head it off at the pass.
Right.
You don't have problems.
right. Yeah.
I guess, and I hear what you're saying about needing to get a better website and all that kind of stuff, but, you know, this notion of making sure that our community gets the information that we think they should have
Mhm.
is important, and so, I mean, if that means that we or the planning commission ultimately has to say like, okay, we think neighbors don't really need to know about a minor subdivision. That's their, you know, if they wanna go down the road that says you get to approve a minor subdivision and there doesn't have to be any notice, that's
Yeah.
what they could do, but I sort of feel like I'd like to have some sort of notice, even if it's not things mailed to them, but if it's at least, you know, people know that they can go on the town website or something and see zoning permits, I guess.
But what's the goal of the notification? Like, what's the end?
Well, because you can appeal,
Right.
right?
Right.
People could appeal his decision.
Right, but then are we starting down a road we don't wanna go back down? I know I'm talking both ends. I totally see both ends, you know?
I don't know. I mean,
Right.
right now, everything is posted here in
Yeah,
in the building, right?
outside,
Right there.
here, what, outside too, though, on the board outside, yeah.
So,
I don't know, I mean, it's just basically deciding, so if you are notified, what is the goal for us to notify people? I understand, again, I know I said it's a small town and people should know, but then it just gives more of an opening for holding up that person, that landowner from developing their
But you're-
property, which
but you're
otherwise would
already-
be developable.
Yeah, but it's actually not, because if he granted it, then it's how many days?
If there's a hearing, 30 days, if there's no hearing, 15.
So even if he handed out the permit, they would still have a period of time to appeal. It's how do they know about it? That's the issue.
Yeah.
I can't say I've ever come here and looked at anything.
I do.
Well, but you're
I walk
saying-
my
you're
dogs
saying
and I
that the
look at
immediate
everything.
abutting
should know
neighbors all
everything
get a
before.
written notice.
There's a hearing only. So if
Well,
we,
so if I've got this lot and I wanna cut it in half, I don't need a hearing.
you currently
currently
do.
you do need a hearing.
So the neighbors all get notified.
Yep.
Yeah.
They do,
And then they're presumably most likely the only ones that are gonna really complain about it,
right,
but
yeah. Yeah, I don't
so
know.
it seems like it's covered to me, but I don't know, where would the issue come from?
Are you looking to do away with the
Mhm.
With the
hearing?
hearing.
Just
You
for
want
For a
to
two-lot
do
subdivision.
away
For two
with
lot
the hearing.
subdivisions.
And I think it's kind of interesting, one of the reasons that we have been looking, and I'm watching the time because I'm gonna let us get out of here in 5 minutes. One of the reasons that we have sort of been looking at ways for the zoning administrator to have more authority in certain things was there were a bunch of times when we couldn't have a hearing because we didn't have a quorum. But now having two alternates, you know, we're not gonna, we theoretically should not end up in that situation of not being able to have a hearing for lack of people, because the couple of times when we had to cancel a hearing that had been scheduled,
Mhm.
and then we had to cancel it because we didn't have a quorum, that's just bad form, I mean, that's.
Yeah.
And you know, when it drags it on 2 months instead of 1 month.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
I get
not-
that.
it's not
Right,
nice.
so.
But I guess if I'm on the other, if I'm a neighbor and somebody's dividing next door, I would at least like to know about
Yeah,
it as
no, I-
opposed to after the fact.
Yeah,
Well, I suppose, I don't know how cumbersome it would make it, Will, but I suppose there could be even though you got to do it, there could be a notice requirement put in,
Right,
just like
right.
we have,
Right,
like if you're doing if you're doing a regular, if there's a hearing, all the abutters get notice.
Would that requirement be upon Will though, or upon the applicant to notify?
It doesn't work having the
It's
well,
applicant.
it's gotta be on.
Yeah.
Especially,
unfortunately.
it's the way the bylaws are written now, that's something I really would like to change. Is the applicants have to send certified letters to every
Yeah.
abutter.
yeah, how did, I mean, you
And there's no
can't
way to-
necessarily know who owns the property.
Yeah, that doesn't
around
make any
you.
sense.
Whereas I can press a button and print up the
Yeah.
labels.
That makes way more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, people don't read certified letters, or they don't even pick them up. certified letters.
Where's
So
that
you have to
part?
send a first class letter and a certified letter. So
The certified letter, I think, is a requirement of the state.
it is.
Yeah.
Oh, not for abutters. It's just for the landowner.
Oh.
They have
So
an
why not
email
just-
option?
So why not just skip the certified letters and just send a regular letter out?
Because it's in our bylaw.
That's
So we
something
should
else, something to think about changing.
Yes. And it's
So-
$10 a pop. So, you know, if you have a property with 20 abutters,
It's a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, all of our hearings start with, have you received the
Mhm.
receipts
right.
for that notification?
Right.
whereas I would have them in my hand if I were sending them myself.
For a
But
small 2 lot, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
For a
All right.
small one, yeah.
I'm willing to entertain a motion to adjourn. I think we accomplished a lot.
Okay.
And move to adjourn.
Okay, oh, whoa, wait a minute.
Oh, sorry,
I
I
think
take
we
it
had, I
back.
think we actually had minutes to approve. Yeah, we did. Okay, going back up before we adjourn then, we have to approve the minutes of the March 5th meeting. So, you weren't there,
No, you weren't there.
so.
Annie was there.
Yeah, maybe we can't approve, we don't have a quorum to approve them.
That was it, it's just us.
Yeah,
Yeah, you were on Zoom, right?
Mhm.
So we were here in Annie.
no, but,
Go Deb.
we don't have
Lawrence
a, we don't have a
was-
quorum
we don't
to
have a
approve.
quorum.
So,
But that's the one I tied in by Zoom.
oh, okay.
Did you?
Yes.
Does
Oh,
the
wait a minute,
minutes-
I have
do
the
minutes
minutes.
reflect
Weren't
that?
you like in a mudroom or something? That's what kind of.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Oh,
We
yeah.
normally like,
Yes.
we normally like to see you in your yacht.
Yes, yes, you were there, so we have, a-
Okay.
you
we
were
did.
there and we have a
Forgot
quorum.
about that.
It was an office, it's an office / mudroom. in
Yeah, it looked like a
Colorado.
mudroom to me. I was like, oh, look at that. He had to find like a place that was quiet and they stuck him in the mudroom.
All right, so, all right, so I have a motion to approve the minutes of the March 5th and a second.
Second.
Any more discussion?
No.
All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Who's doing the
opposed?
minutes today?
I said I would do that.
Then it won't be that hard.
Well, we're just gonna list what the things, we're not gonna put substance in it, we're just gonna put a list of what we talked about. Okay, I will be happy to do something on screening. I'll also be happy to do something on sign. If somebody else wants to take a look at any of those other things too, go ahead. And I think if people would like, we can just continue this. We meet the first Wednesday of the month.
I'll let you know if we get any applications.
Yeah, we have no
Yeah.
application. Is that sad?
So what's the trend in the?
What's going on?
What's all popping over there?
Wyndham is having more hearings than they've had in the last 10 years.
Wyndham.
Signs, or they, a lot of
There
sign
are no
applications?
businesses in Wyndham.
Not signs.
Houses.
Just
buildings.
houses?
A music festival, a house in a house in a
That's a
recreation
good
area,
thing.
a school.
School.
There's
They
some-
can't have, they don't even know.
There's 6 kids in
I
that
know, it's-
school. No,
it's-
seriously, I know someone who graduated,
There's
there
this-
were 6 kids,
There's this
Elaine.
place called Four Corners, which is a architect has a house that looks like a
Oh my God,
spaceship
I
that
know
exploded
this
and
guy.
flew
Oh,
over.
yeah.
And
He's made
he
it in
wants to put up
architectural
another
circles.
building where he will have indentured laborers who's he's gonna call students.
Kind of like.
None of this
Upper
sounds
Santi, right?
Good.
And the music festival on Timber Ridge.
What
Oh
music?
my
What kind of music?
Oh, are they bringing that back?
Is
Yeah,
it the Wyndham?
The
Music
Friends concert?
friendly gathering.
Friendly gathering.
They're gonna eliminate
It's the,
the,
Tim Waker owns it, and his son was a big snowboarder, and
Okay.
it's all the snowboarders got together.
Oh.
I think Roberts is part of the group
Oh,
of those
that's-
guys.
they're gonna,
that's
And they did it
nice.
years ago, and then they moved it to Sugarbush for a while, and I guess
Oh.
they're bringing it back.
Well, that's
and they
nice.
promised to eliminate the EDM because that
From the
brings,
concert,
that brings all the druggies.
The
is
bad
If you
people.
have EDM.
the young people,
Right.
nobody young.
We want to
We
keep
all grew up in
questions.
those
That's my question. What's the idea?
Or I guess.
60s and
Electronic
70s?
dance music.
Okay.
Yes, electronic, well, that's just
Yeah.
because I have children that are in their 20s and 30s, that's the
And
only
you
reason
have
I
to
I'm
know
so
this.
glad you asked. Larry.
Yes, I didn't know what it was.
You have to take
I was like,
ecstasy.
electronic data, what? It's
You
an
have to
exchange
take
of
ecstasy?
privacy?
Yes.
Is that-
If you attend an EDM concert, you have to take ecstasy.
Okay.
Okay.
Again, young
And on
people.
that note.
Young people. All right, thank you. I have to do the ethics. Ethics.
Oh, yeah.
I have to do it.
Do it.